So now we will move towards lesson 6 of Tamil Nadu class 11th. And here we will start a very important lesson in a chapter called as Mauryan Empire. So we have already covered Haryanka dynasty. Then we moved towards Saisungas. Okay. Then we went to Nandas. And finally we have come to Mauryas. Okay. And this whole chronology has been beautifully explained in the another lesson which is called as the ancient history wall chart. So it's a wall chart for the entire history covering from ancient to modern, but in that specifically also you can find in the first 2-3 videos itself the Mauryan Empire and the exact chronology of rulers and the dynasties that are coming. It's a very important lesson. Please do have a look at it. So we will start with the Mauryan Empire, and now we already studied in the last class that Mahapadmananda was the one who started the Nanda dynasty, and then basically Dhan Nanda, he was the last ruler, and he was very cruel. He did not take care of his own crowd, and a lot of people from his own Praja were not happy with their ruler, and that is why this situation was taken benefit of by Chandragupta Maurya and also his advisor Chanakya, also known as Vishnugupta and also known as Kautilya. Okay, so here you will find that the foundation of Mauryan Empire, it opened a new era in the history of India because this was the first time entire India was under one political structure. Okay, there was like a political unity that was attained, and this political unity you will find it is again happening during the Gupta period. Then it is again happening during the Akbar's time in Mughal Empire, which is in medieval India, and now after that it is happening in British India. Okay, so you can see that political unity is happening only a few times, and it all started with the Mauryan Empire. Okay, and also one more aspect where Mauryan Empire assumes important is the writings. Okay, historical writings, because there is so much that we have from this particular era or this particular dynasty that we can actually trace events one by one. Okay, we can form an exact chronology, and there are so many sources available from coins to the edicts to stupas to pillars. There is so much about it. Even the books, not only in India but also from the ambassadors that came from the other empires, like outside India empires who came to India, and they have also written an extensive account about the Mauryan Empire. Okay, so that is what I'm saying. Indigenous as well as the foreign literary sources, epigraphical records are also there to verify whatever has happened, and that is why Mauryan Empire assumes a lot of importance. So first we will look at the sources which give us the information of what is actually Mauryan Empire about. So here the first thing that we should know is the Kautilya's Arthashastra. Okay, Arthashastra is a book written by Kautilya. So it is a book which was written in Sanskrit, that you should know. This has been asked in prelims. Okay, and we already know that Kautilya, he helped Chandragupta Maurya to overtake the Nandas. Kautilya, also known as the Indian Machiavelli, and his book called as the Arthashastra. Okay, it was first discovered by R. Ramashastri, and when in 1904. This Arthashastra has actually, it's a series of books. Okay, just like you have Songs of Ice and Fire, on which basically that famous series called Game of Thrones was formed. So that is also Songs of Ice and Fire is not one book, it is basically many books. Just like that also you will find even Arthashastra has 15 books, it has 180 chapters, but it is basically divided into 3 parts. So if I talk about Arthashastra, I will say all its 15 books can be divided into 3 parts. Okay, the first part will deal with the king and his council and how are they managing the different departments and different affairs of the political structure of the state. Second will deal about the laws, okay, both civil as well as criminal. And the third part will deal about the relations of the Mauryan dynasty with the other empires. Therefore, diplomacy as well as war. Okay, so first is about the internal administration, second is about the laws that you need to govern that administration, and third is about the contacts of this particular empire with the other empire. So diplomacy and war. Okay, and this is like the most important literary source that we have about the Mauryas. Second comes the Visakh Datta's Mudra Rakshas. Okay, the Mudra Rakshas was written by the Visakh Datta, and it's a drama, okay, in Sanskrit. And although you will find that it was written during Gupta's period, So when is it written? Gupta's period, but it describes the Chandragupta Maurya, and it describes the story, exact story of how Chandragupta Maurya, with the help of Kautilya, was able to overthrow Dhananda. This entire drama has been presented in Mudra Rakshasa. Okay. Then comes the Megasthenes Indica. So Megasthenes is actually the Greek ambassador. So he can be called as the foreign literary resource. Okay. So he is the one who will be writing a book, and since he is not an Indian, so basically since he is an ambassador coming from outside to India, therefore his work will be referred as foreign literary source. So Megasthenes was the Greek ambassador, and he was present in the court of Chandragupta Maurya. His book's name is Indica, that you should know. And what happened was that Indica, every part could not survive, only few parts survived. And but those parts also gave very detailed, information about how the kingdom was, how the king was, how his palace was, okay, how's the capital city of Patliputra, and how the military was organized, okay. Even he talks about the society, the structure, and how is the situation of administration, are there any lawbreakers or not. So like all the information is mentioned in Indica. Then comes the other literary sources. So here you will realize that Puranas and Buddhist literatures like Jataka stories also, they have information about the Mauryas. Even the Ceylonese chronicles like Deepvamsa and Mahavamsa. So actually, before we move forward, you should know that these texts are of two types. Okay, one we call as these canonical text, which includes these three Pitakas, Sutta Pitaka, Vinay Pitaka, Abhidham Pitaka, and others are non-canonical texts. So these canonical texts are written in Pali, and non-canonical texts can be written in Pali, cannot be written in Pali. So these non-canonical texts include Jataka stories, okay, and the Ceylonese chronicles, which is basically Deepvamsa and Mahavamsa, okay. And these should throw light. Actually Ceylon was an ancient name of today's Sri Lanka. Okay, so Ceylonese chronicle means basically some chronicles or some stories describing Sri Lanka. So that is what it is saying. They describe the stories of how Ashoka spread Buddhism to Sri Lanka. Okay, so these were all what? These were all literary sources. And now we move towards archaeological sources. So first we will archaeological sources in the sense that you can a building or a pillar or an inscription or a stone, basically something that you can feel, that you can touch. Okay, the inscriptions. So archaeological sources, the first thing that we will discuss is the edicts of Ashoka. And inscripts of, so see, Ashoka was a great ruler of India, and his inscriptions were first deciphered by, this was asked in UPSC prelims, I think 2017 or 18. Okay, so his inscriptions were deciphered by James Prinsep in 1837, and they were written in Pali language, but in some places Prakrit also. And why Ashoka is writing in Pali and Prakrit? Okay, why is he not writing in Sanskrit? When you know that Vishnugupta is writing Arthashastra in Sanskrit, actually Sanskrit was the language of elite, while Pali, Prakrit, Magdi, these are all the languages used by the common people. And edicts means something that you want to tell to the world. So if you want to tell to the world, you need to use the language that they use. And hence you will find that Ashoka's inscriptions are mostly in the languages that belong to the common people. So see, language is something that you're using to speak, okay. But what is a script that you are using to write? So the Brahmi script was employed for writing. But as I already told you, India-Persian relations had been established, and therefore in northwestern India you will find that there was a presence of Kharoshthi script also. So here you will find that Ashoka had basically 14 major rock edicts, okay. And there are two edicts in Kalinga, which is in Odisha, where that great battle happened, after which Ashoka decided to never wage a war. Okay, and the major pillar edicts, I told you that these were basically erected in important cities, and that is why they are called as the major edicts. The edicts of Ashoka are basically like these, I told you, these are like instructions of Ashoka. These are like Ashoka's Dhamma and his instructions, which is giving to the officials, and officials are giving them to the world or the people around. The 13th rock edict, okay, extremely important, has been asked in the state services examination. The 13th rock edict give details about his war with Kalinga. Okay, so which is the edict which gives the information about the war? 13th. And such questions have started appearing in UPSC prelims. If you see 2019 paper, you will realize how factual questions have been asked from this particular ancient history chapters. The pillar edict, now we're talking about, so these are rock edicts, okay, 14 major rock edicts. Now we're talking about pillar edicts. So pillar edicts means, see, rock edicts means something that is inscribed on rock, and pillar edicts means something basically inscribed on a pillar. So pillar edict number 7, Okay, it tells you about the Ashoka's Dhamma, the summary of Dhamma and how he wanted to promote Dhamma in his kingdom. Okay, and thus we will find that apart from literary sources, you also have inscriptions, edicts of Ashoka, either written on rocks or on pillars to verify the events. Okay. Now we will move towards the political history of Mauryas, from where the Mauryan Empire actually started, how it went on, and what happened after Ashoka. So first ruler of the Mauryan dynasty, who was the founder, who was the father, who was the establisher of this Mauryan dynasty, was this Chandragupta Maurya, who was there from 322 to 298 BC. Okay, Chandragupta Maurya was the founder of Mauryan Empire. He, at the young age of 25, he actually captured Patliputra from who? Nanda, okay, the last ruler of Nanda dynasty. And he was assisted by Kautilya, also called Chanakya or Vishnugupta. And after firmly establishing his power in the Gangetic Valley, he wanted to acquire power in the northwestern region and also basically go beyond Indus. Then he will realize that he also expanded his empire in the central Indian region and wanted to cross Narmada river also, but could not, and therefore he refined till the Narmada river. In 300 BC, around 5 BC, he basically marched against the Seleucus Nicator, who was the Alexander's governor general, who was taking care of the territories conquered by the Alexander in the northwestern India. I told you, right? So he appointed 3 governors. So Seleucus Nicator was one of them. And you will realize that Chandragupta Maurya, he wanted to capture northwest India. So he waged a war against Seleucus Nicator. And you will realize that Chandragupta Maurya won the war. Okay. And therefore, a treaty was signed between Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya, in which Seleucus Nicator decided to cede the territories which are trans-Indian, Indus territories. Basically, you can say the territories lying on the east of Indus, definitely Chandragupta Maurya, but also some trans-Indus territories like Arya, Arcosia and Yadrosia. Okay, and to whom will they give? To the Mauryan Empire. Okay, he also gave, Seleucus Nicator was so impressed by the like Chandragupta Maurya, he also married his daughter to the Mauryan prince, basically the Chandragupta. And Chandragupta, like obviously he was getting married, etc. So therefore he gifted like 500 elephants to Seleucus Nicator. So Seleucus Nicator is the person whose daughter is also getting married. He is first waging a war, he is losing it, then marrying his daughter, and also giving certain territories to Chandragupta Maurya. And Seleucus Nicator, basically also sends one of his ambassadors called as Megasthenes, and he sends it to the Chandragupta Maurya's court. And this Megasthenes ends up writing a book called Indica. Then we have Chandragupta Maurya, who embraced Jainism towards the end of his life. And this I studied, this I told you in Buddhism and Jainism chapter also. I told you how Chandragupta Maurya, along with Bhadrabahu, they moved to Karnataka, okay, Shravanbelgola, because of the famine that struck, or the drought and the famine that struck the central Indian region. And they found it hard to basically survive on the Jainist principles, and thus they are basically called as the Digambaras. And you will realize that Chandragupta Maurya was finally succeeded by his son named as Bindusar. Okay, and then basically starts the rule of Bindusar. So Bindusar, as you know, is 298 to 273 BC. So Bindusar, he was also called as the Amitra Ghat. Amitra Ghat means slayer of enemies. Okay, Amitra means someone who is not a friend, basically enemy, and Ghat means finishing off. So finishing off your enemies or slayer of enemies. He's said to have conquered. So Samudragupta was much more mightier than his father. Sorry, it's not Samudragupta. Bindusar was much more much more mightier and much more powerful, even more than the Chandragupta Maurya. He's said to have conquered the Deccan up till Mysore. Okay, he, just like there was a ambassador from the Seleucus Nicator to Chandragupta Maurya's court, there was a Tibetan monk called as Taranta who was present in the Bindusar's court. Okay, and he only mentions how that Bindusar conquered 16 states which were basically comprising the land between the two seas. Okay, and even the Sangam literature mentions the name of Mauryan dynasty and mentions it how they have reached far south. And therefore you can say that Mauryan Empire reached much more heights, expanded much more in the Bindusar's reign. Bindusar received Demicius as an ambassador from Syrian king Antiochus. Okay, and Bindusar also wrote to Antiochus, one asking for a sweet wine like figs, etc. And the later sent all but sophists, because the Greek law prohibited sending the sophists. So he did not send a sophist because Bindusar was interested to know more about theology, etc. So he asked for a sophist, but the demand was not fulfilled. And finally, Chandragupta Maurya is supporting what? A heterodox sect called as Jainism. And his son Bindusar, instead of going to Jainism, he is supporting another heterodox sect called as Ajivika. Okay, so Ajivika, and which was a religious sect which can also be called as the offshoot of Jainism. Okay, and Bindusara finally appointed his son Ashoka as the governor of Ujjain. And this Ashoka, because of his abilities, and it's also said there are many myths around Ashoka that he killed all his 99 siblings to actually gain the throne. So, but no story has been so far confined. But we know that Bindusara has appointed Ashoka as the governor of Ujjain, and it is on his own capabilities that he actually ended up becoming the emperor of India. Okay, so now starts the most famous ruler's history, which is Ashoka the Great. And you should remember the year. Basically, he comes around 250 BC plus minus 20. Okay, so there is a little information which is regarding the early life of Ashoka. As I told you, he was a governor of Ujjain, and he also suppressed many revolts in Takshila during his father's time. And there was an interval of 4 years, and his actual coronation, which basically will find that there is very less information about, and therefore it appears that basically he took the throne after his father's death. So this is not important, but what is important that he was successor of his father. The Ceylonese chronicles, which I already told you, are Deepvamsa and Mahavamsa. They also stated that Ashoka captured power after killing his 99 brothers. Okay, and that's what I'm saying. It's written in a story. It's not written in some Puran or something. So you don't know whether it is actually true or not. The younger brother Tissa, he was spared, but according to Tarhanta of Tibet, Ashoka killed only 6 of his brothers. So you can find that one book is telling something, another book is telling something. Even the Ashoka's edict, you will find it refers to his brothers acting as officers. So that means if Ashoka is telling that his brothers are officers in different states and in different parts of administration, that means he has not killed all of them. Okay. The most important event of Ashoka's reign was his war in Kalinga, which I already told you, which happened around 261 BC. Although there is no much detail about the war and how many people actually participated, what was the course of war, but we know about the war and about how Ashoka decided to actually not go on war again because of his 13th rock edict, which I already told you was present in Kalinga, and where he wrote 150,000 were killed, many times that number perished. After the war, he annexed the Kalinga to the Mauryan Empire, and also he decided to embrace Buddhism. Okay, and his guru, or you can say the Buddhist monk he comes in touch with, is basically Upgupta. Now we will see how Ashoka, he actually ended up practicing Buddhism, and how and when he decided that he needs to spread Buddhism. So there are many scholars who have said few things about on this topic. And around 261 BC, when Ashoka became a Sakya Upasak. So see what is happening in Buddhism. So there are monks which are obviously like the ones who are practicing Buddhism day in and day out, like their daily activity is only to practice it. Then there are people who are lay people, like lay disciples, like people who are traders, who are agriculturists, but they want some sort of relief, spiritual, enlightenment, and but along with they also want to perform their daily chores. So those people are also called as Sakya Upasak, and it's only after you become Sakya Upasak and your abilities are proven that you become a monk, a full-time monk or a bhikshu. So you will realize that Ashoka, he actually first became this Upasak, and then years later he became this monk or bhikshu, and he gave up hunting. He visited Bodh Gaya, which was the holy place for the Buddhists that time, and organized missions also. He appointed special officers which are called as Dharma Mahamantas. Okay, so that he could actually spread the idea of his dharma to the people. In 241 BC, he visited the birthplace of Buddha, which I already told you, Lumbini, and also mentioned an inscription there that Lumbini was not taxed. Okay, and this is mentioned in the Lumbini pillar itself. He also visited other holy places of Buddhism, like there is Sarna, there is Shravasti, there is Kusinagra, and he sent a mission to Sri Lanka under his son Mahendra and daughter Sangamitra. Please remember Ashoka's son and daughter Mahendra and Sangamitra, which went to Sri Lanka to plant the tree, the branch of the Bodhi tree that is present in the Bodh Gaya. Okay, and you will realize that Ashoka also took a lot of interest in building structures, in building architectures, in also creating sanghas. Okay, and he also organized the third Buddhist council in Patliputra, and wherein you will find that Mogliputra Tissa was the president. Now we will talk about the extent of Ashoka's empire. So we have talked how Ashoka was a fierce warrior, okay, and how basically in Kalinga war he won, but after that he started embracing Dhamma. But we also need to know that how was Ashoka able to expand his empire, and till what was the limit of Ashoka's empire also. So we will find that Ashoka's inscriptions mention the southernmost kingdoms. Okay, so that means Ashoka, suppose, I'm so sorry, suppose this is Ashoka's kingdom, okay, ending here. So they also talk about the southern Indian kingdoms like Cholas, Pandyas, Satyapuras, and Kerala Putras, okay, and call them as border state. That means your Mauryan empire has expanded so far and wide, because if these are border state, that means you have already reached till south. Okay, according to Raj Tarangani, which was written during the Kalhana's time in Kashmir, even it was said that Kashmir was also the earlier part of Mauryan Empire. Even Nepal was also within the Mauryan Empire. The northwestern frontier was already demarcated by Chandragupta Maurya, and we didn't want to move forward, because then basically the tribes will be there and it will become really difficult for them to survive. Now, the most important part from which this year's mains also had a question was Ashoka's Dhamma. Okay, although you will find that Ashoka embraced Buddhism and he also became Upasak, from Upasak to Bhikshu next, he also took efforts to spread Buddhism. Okay, his policy of Dhamma was a very, very broad concept and not equal to what Buddhism teaches you Dharma. But see, dharma is basically the something that you should do, but dhamma is your way of life, how you should conduct, how you should behave, how you should talk to people, how you should listen to them, etc., etc. So basically it's like your daily, do's and don'ts. And his principles of dhamma were clearly stated in his edicts, like whatever he's getting inscribed, pillar edicts also and rock edicts also. So now what we'll do is we'll study the main features of Ashoka's dharma. First is, he always used to say that you should serve your father and mother, you should practice ahimsa, you should love truth, you should revere your teachers who are giving you knowledge, and also you should be good, treating good your relatives. Secondly, he said that you should prohibit the use or animal sacrifices and festive gatherings and avoid expensive extravaganza in these weddings and ceremonies. Third, he efficiently organized the administration so that social welfare and maintenance of a constant contact with people, okay, can be maintained, and this was attained by appointing dharma yatras. Then humane treatment of servants or somebody who is below you and serving you, so that you should also treat them well. Similar goes to the government officials who are treating prisoners. Then comes the consideration and non-violence to the animals, and also basically to respect everyone's liberty. Then there was tolerance, which should be there for the different religions or sects, because we know that at around that time we already had 2 or 3 new religions coming, and India was already a multicultural society. And finally, he said that conquest of dharma should be there instead of war. That means if I acquire new territory now, I will be acquiring it via dharma, but not by war. Okay, so Ashoka's dhammas are identical to teachings of Buddha, but they are not equal to teachings of Buddha. Okay, and Buddhism remained, see, there was king whose personal belief was Buddhism, but he wanted to take good things from Buddhism, and because they could be practiced in daily life and could make everyone's life better. So Ashoka decided to take these things and actually implement them as dhamma instead of calling him dharma, what they call it in Buddhism. And also during this time you will realize that Ashoka was able to actually tell it to people that now we don't need to wage wars for basically expanding our empire. What we need to do is basically apply dhamma. Okay, so the concept of non-violence, which we called as ahimsa, and the similar ideas, okay, of dhamma, they are identical to the teachings of Buddha but not equivalent to it. The dhamma of Ashoka was a more general code, a way of living, and you will realize that he wished that his dharma could actually kill all the social evils that were present around. Finally, we will go to estimate of Ashoka. So Ashoka estimate in the sense that what is it about, what is the personality of Ashoka and his personal life little bit, etc. So Ashoka was the greatest of kings who surpassed even the Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar and even the renowned Europeans rulers in the world. Okay, and there have been many lines written about Ashoka, but what was true about Ashoka was that he was not a dreamer but a person who could do things. Okay, his dharma, which was not exactly what Buddhism's dharma was about. His dharma was so universal that it appealed to humanity in a larger way, and it impacts us even today. Okay, he was known for his benevolent administration, especially after the Kalinga War, and he used to follow the policy of non-aggression even after his victory in the war. Okay, and his central idea was that humanity should be promoted at each and every level. Finally, we'll talk about the later Mauryas. So after Ashoka's death in 232 BC, basically what was happening was Ashoka conquered a lot of area, and this much area came under Ashoka. Now this large empire was very hard to actually take care of, and that is why Mauryan Empire was divided into 2 parts. western and eastern. The western part was ruled by Kunal, who was a son of Ashoka. Okay, Kunal here, and the eastern part was ruled by the eastern part was ruled by the Dashrath. So there is Kunal and there is Dashrath, okay, who was one of the grandsons of Ashoka. And due to the Bactrian invasions, the western part of the empire, this part, okay, which was under Kunal, this part of the empire collapsed. And the eastern part was intact under Samprati, successor of Dashrath. So the last Mauryan king was Brihadharta, and who was assassinated by another ruler or another general of his army called as the Pushyamitra Sunga. And this Pushyamitra Sunga basically established what we know as the Sunga dynasty. Okay, before we move any forward, we should just see various, you will find here some places have been mentioned. Okay, these places either have rock edicts or they have they have rock edicts or they have pillar edicts. Okay, but just at least have a rough idea, like Taxila is there, Indraprastha is there, Kalsi is there, Sarnath is there, but Patliputra is there, Gaya is there, Kalinga is there, Augada is there. Okay, then there is Chandragiri. Okay, and then here also you have Kerala Putras, etc. So you will find that there are many places where Ashoka was ruling and he tried to establish a boundary, at least a boundary in his mind wherein he wanted to establish the edicts. Okay, like rock edicts and pillar edicts, etc. Now we'll move forward to the Mauryan administration. Okay, because now we know what happens to Maurya, when did Ashoka become, what happened after Ashoka, two parts, and finally who took it over. So now we'll discuss about the Mauryan administration. Okay, so the Mauryan administration, the first part that we need to discuss is the central government. The ascendancy of Mauryas had resulted in the triumph of monarchy, because we know that it was basically a monarchy, and there were other systems like republics and oligarchies. They were also present in the pre-Mauryan time, but in Mauryan time you will realize that only monarchy is prevalent and all other forms have collapsed. Okay, although Kautilya or Vishnugupta was the foremost political theorist of ancient India, and that is why we call him as Indian Machiavelli. Okay, but he did not wanted royal absolutism, because he know that once if king decides to give an order, okay, and he only follows his heart, administration can't be efficient. Therefore, he said that he does not want royal absolutism, and he advocated the king that should make an advice of his ministry in running an administration. And that is why you will realize that Mauryan, this Chandragupta Maurya had a council. Like he had Senapati, he had spy person also, he has treasurer also, he has person who wants to establish external relations. So everyone under one roof, and through their understanding and their, you can say, their whatever they say, basically king used to do that. And therefore a council of ministers called Mantri Parishad assisted him for administration, and it consisted. So this is like king, and this is his assembly of Mantri Parishad who are going to assist him. Okay, who are going to assist him to take decisions. So you will realize that it consisted of Purohit, Mahamantri, Senapati and Yuvraj. Okay, Purohit is what we call as the head priest. Mahamantri is like someone who's like today's Amit Shah. Okay, basically someone who's like home minister and taking care of important departments. Then there is Senapati, who's taking care of the military, and Yuvraj is someone who's taking like care of other things. Now there were civil servants also, which were called as the Amtyas, and they used to look after the day-to-day administration. These officers are similar to what we want to become today, which is basically IAS, and the method of selection of Amtyas was already given by Kautilya in his book Arthashastra. Okay, and Ashoka, we already know, he wanted to appoint Dharma Mahamantras so that they could spread around the knowledge of Dharma, and they could read the edicts. They could actually make the people understand the edicts, and if the people would have doubts, they would actually explain it also. Okay, so finally you know that Mauryan state had IAS officers. That means they also had a civil service. Fine. Then we come to the revenue department. So the Samarth, okay, he is the chief of revenue department. Who is the chief of revenue department? Is the Samarth, and he was also in charge of the collections that are happening, all the revenues that is coming. And these revenues, what are the sources of revenues? And this becomes your prelims question, because you won't read this and UPSC will ask question from this. So you will realize that revenues came from land, irrigation, customs, shop taxes, ferry taxes, forest, mines and pastures. Even licensing fees and from craftsmen, fines collected in and outside of law courts, etc. So everything constituted the government revenues. And finally, the land revenue is normally fixed as 1/6 of the produce, as I already told you. And this is a number that you should also remember, because 1/6 is generally the number that produce the revenues have been taken for. and the main item of expenditure was state was to actually look after the king and his household, and lot of treasury amount was just going to maintain the king's lifestyle. Okay, then we come towards the army. The Mauryan army was very well organized and it was under the control of Senapati. I already told you military basically. The salaries of the armies were paid in cash because that is what Kautilya had said. Kautilya also refers to the salaries given to different people of different ranks and different amounts. Okay, and according to this Greek author Pliny, the Mauryan army consisted of 6 lakh infantry, 30,000 cavalry, 9,000 elephants, 8,000 chariots. That means they had everything. They had people on foot, they had people on chariots, like which are run on horses. They had also elephants and they also had cavalry. In addition to these 4 wings, you will realize that navy and transport and supply wings were also there. And each wing, if you are making any wing, then each wing is under the control of Adhyaksh, or what we call as superintendent. Okay, and Megasthenes mentions that how 6 boards of 5 members were there to control the 6 wings of the military. Okay, and this is very, very, very important, that how Kautilya had a very well organized army also. Then let's come to the Department of Commerce and Industry. So this department, you will find that it had controlled the real, basically it was responsible for what? Department of Commerce is responsible for ensuring there are enough commodities in the market, there is some sort of trade happening, and even the prices remain little lower so that inflation does not run very high. But the Department of Commerce had, somewhere you can say that control the retail and wholesale prices of goods to ensure that there is a steady supply also and people get their required benefit also. Okay, and they were also put under Adhyaksha. And these Adhyakshas used to come randomly inspect the shops. They used to see if the weights and measures are standard or not. And then they used to see if the material bought is from inside or outside and have the revenues being paid to the government itself or to the king. Then comes the judicial and police department. So Kautilya mentions the existence of both civil as well as the criminal courts. Okay, the Chief Justice of Supreme Court was called as the Dharmatikaran. Okay, somebody who is like the head of the Dharma and he is going to decide the case of you. Then there were also subordinate courts at the provincial levels and then district courts under Amatyas. So basically, civil servants, if you know, earlier in time, they were also the district magistrate. So basically, there was no concept of separation of power. And now here you realize that different kinds of punishment were given to offenders. Okay, there was like torture technique also that was used, and that you will realize that Gupta people have stopped using it. Then we study about the Gupta Empire, which came exactly like 500 years later. The police stations were found in all the principal centers. Both Kautilya and the Ashokan edicts, they mention about this jail and jail officials. And Dharma Mahamantras were asked by the Ashoka to take step against the unjust imprisonment. Okay, then comes the exercise of census. So taking of census was very regular exercise during the modern period. The village officials, basically, they see what is a census exercise. It is an exercise where you want to count how many people are there, what they are doing, how many above 60, etc. So basically all your demographic information. Now this census, you will realize, was basically regularly being conducted by Mauryan Empire, and village officials were basically the one to number the people along with their details like their caste and occupation. They were also to count the animals in each house to say that whether this particular house has an opportunity to learn or not. Okay, earn or not. And the census in the towns was taken by the municipal officials so that they could track the movement of population, both foreign and indigenous. And the data collected were cross-checked by the spies. Okay, so that means they have an extensive spy system also to ensure that nobody is going haywire. Okay. And the last thing that we have is provincial and local administration. Okay, apart from the architecture and art and craft that we will start next. So you will realize that Mauryan Empire was divided into 4 provinces. What were those 4 provinces? Taxila, Ujjain, Suvalgiri and Swarnagiri and Kalinga. So Swarnagiri is basically in Karnataka, Ujjain is MP, Taxila is the northwestern frontier, and Kalinga is Odisha. So that means he has set a limit as in north, south, east and west. Okay, limit and where he has basically from Mauryan Empire, you can say, has been majorly present. Okay, the provincial governors were mostly appointed from the members of the royal family, because obviously you can't trust everybody with the revenues, etc. So therefore you want your particular person, okay, who belongs to the royal family, to be as appointed as a provincial governor. They were responsible for the maintenance of law and order and collection of taxes for the empire. The district and administration was under the charge of Rajakas, whose basically position and functions were similar to what modern day collectors have. And he was assisted by Yuktas or subordinate officials. The village administration was in hands of Gramani, and his official suitor were called Gopa. So there is Gramani, and then you will form a lot of people will come, and it will become Gopa. Okay, who will be in charge of 10 or 15 villages. Now both Kautilya as well as Meghasthini, they provide a system of municipal administration. Okay, and Arthashastra even contains a separate chapter on it. And he said that how the ruler of that particular place is the chief duty was to maintain that law and order. Okay, and Meghasthani refers to the 6 communities of 5 members each to look after the administration of Patliputra. Okay, so that they could take care of industries, foreigners, even registration of birth and death, manufacturing and collection of sales tax. And finally, we will come to the modern art and architecture. Okay. So you will realize that modern art and architecture basically means the art and architecture that was built during the modern period. So you will realize that monuments before the period of Ashoka, they were mostly made of wood, and therefore they could not exist because like wood is very hard to actually exist for such like thousands of years. But the use of stone started once basically Ashoka came to power, and that is why Ashoka is also known as the man to think first in stone, because he was the one who wanted his ideas to survive for a longer period of time, and therefore he did not want wood but he wanted stones. Okay, his place and monasteries and most of his stupas have disappeared, we know already, and the remaining stupas are very few. For example, Sachi. First we will take like about the pillars. So what are these pillars? So you will realize that pillars are like these long shafts which have like a capital base. Okay, for example, umbrella or bell, etc. Then they have this abacus on which they write. Oh, sorry, not abacus. Basically, some sort of rectangle where they light, and then after that you will have an animal motif. Okay, this is the pillar structure that I am talking about. So the pillars erected by Ashoka, they were like much more finer than the people, like they have copied from somewhere which is Persia. Okay, Ashokan pillars with inscriptions were found in places like Sarnath, Allahabad, Rumini, Dubai, Sanchi or Delhi, and that their tops were crowned with the figures of animals like lions, elephants, bulls, etc. Okay, and the Sarna pillar, which you know is also the emblem of India, is basically 4 lions back to back, and you can't see one lion because that is on the back. Okay, and the government adopted its capital, we already know, that basically as a state emblem. Now we have stupas. So one thing is pillars, second thing is stupa. You know that Ashoka was the one who built, it said that he built more than 84,000 stupas, and somewhere you will realize that these stupas became very magnificent only later, and only few have survived. The famous example of Sanchi stupa with the massive dimension is just one of those that we have lost. It was originally built in bricks, but later on, after the time of Ashoka, you will realize that they have become much more beautiful. Then you have caves also. So caves, you will find that there are very less presence of caves, but caves were also presented to Ajivikas by Ashoka and his son Dasrath. Okay, even though Ashoka is embracing Buddhism, but he is not asking his son to not follow any other sect, and that is why his son basically presented the caves to Ajivika. Their interior, so these caves are basically like the semicircular opening, and then they have like a long room at the back, which is like highly polished, and on the gate they have like motifs of animals which you find like they are moving. Okay, so the interior walls are polished like a mirror, and these were meant to be the residence of these monks. And the caves at Parbar Hills near Bodh Gaya is a wonderful piece of modern architecture. After having discussed like how brilliant the empire was, how there were so many rulers, they came like a stability, but now everything has to end, and thus we discuss the causes for decline of Mauryas. So the causes for decline of Maurya had been widely debated by scholars. The traditional approach was basically attributed to the policies of Ashoka, his pacifying policy, and also to his large empire but weak successors. Okay, then we can also talk about the political and economic situation that came because somewhere you know that Mauryan Empire is not at its zenith. Okay, it was at that Ashoka's pro-Buddhist policies which antagonized, it is said, okay, this is not proof, it is only said that pro-Buddhist policies of Ashoka might have antagonized the Brahmins. Okay, and therefore they decided to actually brought about a revolution under Pushyamitra Sunga, who finally basically dethrones the Mauryan dynasty and then establishes the Saisunga dynasty. Okay, and but here also then you can put counter argument saying that Ashoka was never about one religion. Okay, he never acted like against any other religion, even though he himself embraced Buddhism. Okay, his policy of non-violence reduced the spirit of fight, at least fighting spirit in his army, and he wanted to change the spirit in his army that everything cannot be just won by war. Okay, therefore, now you must be thinking that, you know, if he was there in Kalinga and he decided to change his mind, did he also disband in the army? Answer is no. So that is why it is like a little conflicting view that on one side he wanted to establish peace, but he was not ready to trust the people solely. He also wanted to have his system in backup. Okay, and that is why he never disbanded his army. And therefore, if you suggest say that, you know, Ashoka is responsible for the decline of modern empire, it might be not correct. And there are multiple causes for decline of modern empire. For example, empire being too broad, there were weak successors, there was already a partition of empire and administrative abuses after Ashoka's reign. And the combination of all these factors basically ended up in breaking of modern empire and establishment of Pushyamitra Sunga, establishing Sunga dynasty. And this is where we will end this particular chapter. And thanks for your attention and also for your patience. If you like these chapters, do mention in the comment box below. Thank you.